Binge the full week of The Ray Taylor Show ad-free over at patreon.com/inspired disorder.
What you manifest in your mind, you can bring to reality.
This is my top 5 films from the Saw franchise. I brutalized and tortured myself this week by rewatching all 9 films in the Saw franchise, from Saw 1 to Spiral. And surprisingly, I had seen most of them. I think up until the final chapter, which is the 7th in the series, I had seen all of them. And so I hadn't seen Jigsaw. I hadn't seen Spiral. And I forgot that I had seen all of them, because that's something that this franchise does. It makes you want to block out the memory of seeing some of these movies for different reasons. I did enjoy the franchise. Obviously, this is a franchise where, you know, the killer forces his victims to play games in order to potentially save themselves or save other people. It's all about redemption and learning and forcing them to learn and be mindful of their mistakes that they have done in their life, which is interesting. This is also a franchise that relies heavily on flashbacks, because the main guy dies pretty early into the franchise. So a lot of these stories are shown with flashbacks back to like these different layers of behind the scenes things that were happening around what the original movie was, which gets a bit heavy and gets a bit mentally, like the complexity of the storytelling in this, because it's all done through flashbacks, and like it becomes almost as brutal as the torture devices that these victims are suffering. Like, as a viewer, you are being tortured by trying to maintain all of the different twists and turns that are going on and flashbacks that are happening in your head. And eventually that pressure gets released, and you kind of can tap out from having to hold all of those ideas in your head at once, but it gets rough. But anyway, let's get it started with my top 5 films in the Saw franchise in order, ranked, starting off with number 5. It's a movie that I just did not see until, I watched it yesterday, I think. The newest of the franchise, but also the weirdest. Not the weirdest. I'm talking about Spiral. It's a film that came out in 2021. Came out this year, apparently. Feels like it came out years ago, but still the most modern one. This one is starring Chris Rock. This one is starring Samuel L. Jackson. Like, I knew Chris Rock was in it, but when Samuel L. Jackson shows up as his dad, Chris Rock's dad, which is like, I don't buy that for a second, but whatever. Like, those facts alone make this movie, I had to put it on the list. I had to. It's probably one of the better Chris Rock performances. It's Samuel L. Jackson. You can't go wrong. The movie is definitely trying to be like Seven. Chris Rock is doing like a Denzel Washington Training Day type of performance, which is okay. The movie's trying to be Seven. At this point in the franchise, people are aware of the Jigsaw Killer. There have been copycats at this point. In this version, the kills are very simple, like aesthetically. I think this movie, because the franchise at one point, it starts off super grungy, and the kills, the tests, or the games that are played, quote unquote, that are played in the early games have a complexity to them that the later movies in the franchise just completely get rid of. Like, some of these movies later in the franchise look super glossy. They almost look like game shows. Like if somebody were to make a Saw game show, whatever production quality you would see as a game show, like think of like Floor is Lava type of stuff. That's what this movie franchise kind of ended up becoming, which is sad because it was a grungy, disgusting, gory franchise. And it maintained that aesthetic throughout most of the franchise up until I would say like the 3D one is when it changed. But yeah, this one, Spiral, it felt like it was going back to more of a gritty look. It had, I mean, not necessarily as grungy of a look to it, an aesthetic to it, but definitely a darker looking film than the more recent, the ones that it followed. But yeah, Spiral, interesting. It really felt like it was a movie that could have been any type of a movie, but they ended up attaching it to this franchise for some reason. It's got the big sliding barn door, like the first one had when he closed the door at the very end. This one has a similar moment. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a decent movie. It was like the least attached to the franchise. Like you don't really have to watch the franchise at all to watch this one. It's a standalone. I mean, the franchise kind of just gets into copycats anyway, but this one stands alone. It's got an interesting story. The complexity of the decisions that have to be made in order to survive are like not very good, but at least it tried a little bit. So anyway, coming in at number 5, there's aspects to it that are okay. Samuel L. Jackson, Chris Rock, it's fun to see them in a Saw movie. What? But then you could tell it was a different franchise because, like, there's a scene where Samuel L. Jackson's character is strung up. He's being bled to death. And in a normal Saw franchise, you would see hooks going through his arms, going through the flesh, actually stringing him up. But in this one, it has, like, metal armbands that are holding him up with the strings. You're not actually seeing blood drip. It's like got these little IV tubes coming out of them. Like it's a very, like if you were to G-rate, like if Disney were to take over the Saw franchise, that's what it feels like. These kind of the last movies. Not Spiral. Spiral seemed like it was getting back to what the franchise was, but still lasers. Like it just got lazy. It got pretty lazy. But out of that, I thought it was a fun addition to the franchise. So it's coming in at number 5. Spiral at number 5. My number 4 favorite Saw movie in the franchise is the second Saw film, Saw 2. And like I said, especially like the first 3 movies, but I mean so many of them, like Jigsaw is dying. He's got cancer, he's got a tumor. He eventually dies in this franchise. I think he dies actually in 2. No, he dies in 3. But 2 is happening like alongside 1. You're seeing that he has like it kind of takes 1 and then blows it up. Instead of it's 2 people inside of this room trying to get out of this room, solve the clues, solve the puzzle, and also see how the 2 characters are related to each other. This one blows it up to where it's like a group of people who are not just in a room. They're going through like basically like an escape room, and each room is a different level, and they're trying to get an antidote, and they have to do these crazy things in order to get the antidote. But the real thing is there's a kid with them, and the kid is the son of a cop, and the cop is got right, being played by Wahlberg. Donnie Wahlberg is the cop. And this kid is his son, who he doesn't really, like, he's not a great dad. But the son is with all these people in the game, and all the people around him are criminals that this cop, like, fabricated evidence to get them in jail. But they don't know that yet, but eventually they will. So it's, I don't know, it's got, like, good aspects of the thing. You know, you're seeing some pretty gory stuff. There's, like, a scene where this woman gets pushed into just a pit of syringes. She's trying to find a key and the time limit on it, and she's like brushing syringes away and just getting stabbed with these dirty syringes trying to find a key. There's this like giant dude that's just an asshole to everybody. He pushes her in to go. It's brutal. It's a brutal movie, but I enjoyed it. It's got like, it wasn't too complex yet, right? It didn't have all of the weight of the many flashbacks that happen and the many interwovenness of all the previous movies. It just felt like it was a bigger budget version of the story. So I liked it. It came in at number 4. A little over 4 years ago, I started The Many Faces. It's an ongoing series of abstract ink portraits. Each piece is improvised. Each piece is released daily. Start collecting now. Head on over to inspireddisorder.com/TMF. That stands for The Many Faces. And save yourself 25% when you use coupon code RTS. That stands for The Ray Taylor Show, because that's what you're listening to, and I love you. So I want you to save 25% when you use that coupon code. Head on over to inspireddisorder.com/TMF and use coupon code RTS to save 25% when you start collecting one of over 1,600 original ink paintings. By myself, I made them. Support me. I love you. Back to the show. Number 3, my number 3 favorite Saw film is Saw number 5. Surprise, surprise. Saw number 5. This one we have a copycat. You get our first copycat. You get a police officer who's pretending to be the Jigsaw Killer. The Jigsaw Killer catches him because he knows that's not his work and ends up kind of recruiting him, similarly how he recruited the woman who was his sidekick for the second and third of the films. She's the junkie that survived the jaw, the reverse jaw clamp thing that like rips your jaw open. So anyway, this is a cop. The downside of this movie is that there's 2 cops and they're kind of after each other and they kind of look like the same guy. Little confusing. Not as confusing as Saw 4, which there are the transitions between what's happening and the flashbacks are so seamless that many times I forget that we've transitioned. I'm like, why is that person in the room? And it's like, no, they just panned from in the pan. It went from current day to whenever the flashback was. And it's just super confusing. The bad guy in fourth, the guy that's being tested, it's like so many of the people, like all of the people, especially in these first ones, these are people that Jigsaw Killer is trying to teach a lesson to because they've been bad. Whether they're criminals that have been bad and done bad things, or police officers that are dirty, which is a big aspect of a lot of the first ones, is that this Jigsaw Killer is taking out dirty cops. I mean, even Donnie Wahlberg's character is a dirty cop. He's the reason why all those people were falsely imprisoned. They weren't good people, but there was like evidence was planted and things like that. Reasons why they wouldn't like him when they got out. But anyway, number 5, you have this new copycat killer, which you see him. It helps to explain, I think, the first 3 movies better than watching the first 3 movies in a lot of ways, because you have also this cop was involved in the background of helping set everything up. So it kind of helps clarify some stuff, which is nice, despite the fact that there's 2 cops that are against each other that kind of look similar. But it has the gore. It makes sense that like, certain things maybe aren't working right, or, because he starts doing things and you can see that like, he's the copycat. So it's not, the complexity isn't there because it's not the same killer. It's not the Jigsaw Killer. It is this copycat, and because it's the copycat, these challenges aren't as intricate and complex as they were earlier when it was the Jigsaw Killer, and it was like this like human mousetrap of like torture that people had to navigate and try to figure out and solve and get away from. So anyway, number 5, Saw 5 is my favorite. I enjoyed it a lot. It was just like I liked it because it didn't, despite like still referring to all of the things that happen and explaining things that happen, like it didn't hurt my brain as much as like the first three did. Like there is so much like just especially four. Four was super confusing on a lot of levels. So the fact that it stopped trying to be as complex as possible and just it felt like it just took a step back and just kind of let some things be. I enjoyed it. So that made number 3 on my list is Saw 5. Coming in at number 2, my second favorite Saw film in the Saw franchise is Saw 6. And I think like Rotten Tomatoes or just like ranking wise, Saw 5 and 6 are like the lower ranked ones. But that's okay. I don't really care about that. I don't care about ratings. This is my personal list. So number 2 is Saw 6, which I liked because instead of taking on the dirty police, the disgusting, dirty terrorists that are known as police officers, this one is taking on the health insurance scam. Because, of course, as we know, the Jigsaw Killer died of cancer. He had a tumor. And part of that was the fact that he wasn't, like, given, like, his diagnosis wasn't viable for this insurance company to pay for treatment. So they denied treatment, and he died sooner than he would have. So this is his revenge on, which I enjoy. Like, I want to enjoy, the best way to enjoy the Saw movies is when you understand the people that are being tortured are bad people. And then you kind of like, oh, I don't mind that their limbs are being like torn apart. I don't mind that like these horrific, like I would love to see these horrific things happen to, you know, dirty cops. Dirty politicians. I don't think the movies ever went to politicians. Kind of did. There were definitely some city workers in one of the movies. But yeah, taking on health insurance providers and them not wanting to cover health related things because it's not profitable for them. I loved it. So on that level, and it still had the level of like crazy things that happen where people have to sacrifice in order to save. Still had that layer of the kind of the storytelling and the reasoning behind the tragic and gruesome things that happen. But yeah, my second favorite is number 6. And again, it doesn't really. There are some references and flashbacks to, I mean, a lot of it's a flashback. This all happened when he was still alive. But this is like one of the last kind of Jigsaw things before he died. This setting this thing up. I enjoyed it. It kind of like, it separated itself from the baggage and the stress of trying to understand everything that the first 3 movies were doing and just kind of allowed you to be like, you kind of know. This guy's seeking revenge. He's doing it in interesting ways. Let's see some people who are horrible in our healthcare institution get some comeuppance. So yeah, number 2, my second favorite Saw movie is Saw 6. Now my favorite Saw movie should be easy. Hopefully people know. Of course, my favorite Saw film from the Saw franchise is the very first Saw movie. I remember seeing this movie in a theater. I took a date. It was our first date. Thankfully, she was into horror films. And it was crazy, man, seeing that very first Saw movie with the dude, with Carrie Elwes, the dude that you haven't seen since Princess Bride, being locked in that just grimy ass bathroom with some photographer, and seeing you also have Danny Glover as one of the detectives who's trying to track down this killer. It's early on. It's the first movie, so the fact that there's still flashbacks in this movie and there's still like like the narrative and the plot of this movie is an interwoven tapestry of like deception and revenge. Like it has yet to be bogged down by itself in the sequel in the third one. That I enjoyed it, and it's you get to see some gruesome kills. It's it's lightweight enough where you can just enjoy it. You're not confused by everything going on. It's a great ending to the movie where it's like, oh, he was laying down the whole time right in front of you. It was good. It was good. Yeah. So my number one is the OG, the original, because it set everything up. It also did it really well. For the independent movie that it was, this movie by James Wan, like it brought a complexity to a genre that would have felt cheap if it didn't have that complexity and that kind of that mystery of what's going on and how is this all gets like what does it all mean? That big question of what does it all mean? And this movie does such a good way of answering that question throughout the runtime, and leaving you in a lot of ways happy with the end. Like you feel satisfied because you get to know these people and why they're there. And it, in some ways, maybe not justifiably, but it definitely, you change your opinion on them and you change your opinion on what should happen to them and what your feelings are as things happen to them. And I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot. So yeah, that's my favorite Saw movie. Let me go over the list one more time. Number 5 is Spiral. Number 4 is Saw 2. Number 3 is Saw 5. Number 2 is Saw 6. And my number 1 favorite Saw film is Saw, the very first Saw that came out in 2004. 2004. Now, some of the movies that didn't make the list, Saw 3 was a runner-up. I just didn't like it. It's like this thing where he gets a doctor to try and save him, and then meanwhile the husband of the doctor is going through other things, and he's trying to pass these tests. I don't know. I just didn't like it. I didn't like everything that was going on. I don't know. It didn't fit. So, but it was my runner-up. It was almost going to be there. It was almost going to be my number 5, and then I saw Spiral and like, well, that was a lot of fun, even though it was trying to be 7, or Training Day mixed with 7. But I can appreciate them trying to do something new for a change. I mean, this franchise turned into a procedural. The Final Chapter, Saw Final Chapter, which was Saw 3D in theaters, the 7th film. That's when it got rid of the grunginess, and that was because of the 3D. That movie is entirely playing to the 3D aspect of it. The story is like, it's all the copycat killer, so I think in that way, it doesn't have to be as smart of kills in Saw 3, and even more so in Jigsaw. Saw 4, so there were still some cool kills in 7 in the 3D one, but overall not the greatest. Saw 4 is just kind of confusing. You're following this black cop that's like, he's being punished for being too good, for trying to save people. I don't know. The overall narrative of it was like, I didn't understand why he was being targeted, but also like the just the way it was edited. There was a lot of transitions that were like going from flashbacks to not, and I was like, wait, where am I? Why is that person in that room? Oh, they're not in that room anymore. That was before. It was very confusing. But the Jigsaw was horrible. It was like, first off, they brought Jigsaw back. Somehow he's alive. And we're in a world where people know the rules to Jigsaw, like culturally in the universe of the Saw films. Like people eventually, like there's I think Final Chapter was no, Jigsaw. Which one was the one? Carrie Elwes comes back. It might be Jigsaw. Let me see here in my notes. But there is one where Carrie Elwes comes back, and it's like we saw him dead in like multiple of these movies, but it's a world where people are, let's see, laser cutters. Which one was the one that felt like a game show? The 3D. So the 3D one kind of wraps everything up nice. Carrie Elwes is back in the 3D one, and he's like had been recruited because he survived in this new retcon version of the story. So that kind of wrapped it up nice, even though I didn't like the movie. Saw 3D, it kind of ended it. But then they came back with Jigsaw, which for some reason he's alive, and like still alive despite the fact that culturally everybody knows, because there's somebody who pretends to be a survivor of the Saw of Jigsaw, and then he shows up at a book signing. He's like, here, and he ends up getting him. But it feels like a game show. Like if you were to, like, production quality wise of the Saw games felt clean and sterile like a game show. It looked dumb. It looked so dumb. So dumb. Jigsaw. Jigsaw is by far the worst in the franchise. By far the worst. But anyway, I'll go over my top 5 one more time. My top 5 Saw movies. Number 5 is Spiral. 5 is Spiral. Number 4 is Saw 2. Number 3 is Saw 5. Number 2 is Saw 6. And number 1 is the original Saw film. Let me know what your favorite Saw movies are in the comments. Hit me up on social media at Ray Taylor. Let me know what your favorite Saw movies are. I don't recommend watching the franchise all at once. It will leave you feeling bad. But some of the movies are really good. I was nervous about doing this, and it ended up being. I ended up like really getting into it. It took a while, but I enjoyed it. So yeah, that's it. My top 5 favorite Saw films from the Saw franchise. New episodes of The Ray Taylor Show come out every single day. Subscribe on IGTV, YouTube, and everywhere else podcasts are found. Binge the full week ad-free over at patreon.com/inspired disorder. Follow the show on Instagram at Ray Taylor Show. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Peace out!